Welcome to the next episode of the podcast on negotiation. And today we have a very special guest and a very special topic. We'll talk about negotiation pedagogy, and our guest is Sherman D. Roberts, Professor Roberts, who is the founding academic director of Oxford Program on Negotiation at Oxford University Said Business School, who was a founding director of the executive seminars at Harvard Kennedy School, who began his professional career in Venezuela as a professor for behavioral sciences and technology in the technology section of Simon Bolivar University, and who currently holds the following positions. He's the president of Blackwell University, that will become operational later this year, who's the chairman of Cambridge Institute for Business Leadership, and who's working on the book, some of contents of which we'll touch upon later during our discussion, entitled The Result-Driven Negotiation Method. Sherman, it's great to have you with us.
And it's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you and to your audience, of course.
Absolutely. Having mentioned the audience, you guys are welcome to ask your questions and comments in the chat as we move along through our material. So Sherman and I met waiting in line for lunch during his time at Oxford, working as the academic director together with Tim Cullen at the Oxford Program on Negotiation. And back then, it was at the beginning of my PhD, and I was absolutely amazed by your kind hospitality. You invited me to sit with you at the lunch table and have lunch with you, and I was super surprised how open and inclusive you were, even despite the fact that I basically had very little to say about negotiation. So that was, I wanted to thank you for this, Sherman, for your openness, and we kept in touch. I was also inspired by your talk during Warsaw Negotiation Round on negotiation pedagogy, and this will be also the topic of our today's chat. Sherman, my first question is: how did you connect to the world of negotiation? How did this whole adventure start for you?
That's an excellent question. I think I should probably say something about my approach today. I would classify myself as, to give a thumbnail, as a romantic for results through negotiation. I'm as romantic as anyone in any orientation with regard to the potential that negotiation has to change the world. But I think that we need, for example, to solve the problems result-wise, rather than just getting agreements that say those situations have been solved. So it's a matter of, that's where I am today. I'm very results-oriented. I began when I was deputy director of the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies, participate in the Harvard Program on Negotiation programs, the 2-day, the 3-day, the 5-day, all of them. I probably have the world's record for the most attendances at PON events without having to pay for them, because their marketing person was also our marketing person at the Cambridge Center. And he wanted me to see what they were doing and talk to participants and see what I could learn from that. So that's how I kind of got up to my nose in the Harvard negotiation approach. And strangely enough, even when I went to the Kennedy School, I was unable to do. I did 9 programs on leadership for the Kennedy School, different processes of leadership like decision-making, persuasion, performance improvement, that kind of thing. And these were for a general executive audience. They wouldn't let me do a negotiation program, though, because they said, well, we already have a negotiation program, which is only for public sector people. So, you can't do it. And so it was only when Tim Cullen and I became business partners and friends that I did a program. We did a 3-day program as part of a larger program on leadership at Oxford's Keble College. It's called the International Leadership Program at Oxford. And that was our debut. And then After that, and kind of as a consequence of that, I was invited to create a program for the then Oxford Executive Education, which through a strange process became only the Said Business School. For a while, they had two business schools at Oxford. At any rate, there for a number of years, we did a fairly standardized but somewhat nuanced program that I would say falls in what I call the dominant Western approach to negotiation. It was close to what I had learned at Harvard, but I began to deviate away from that and look for ways that we could have a more integral approach to negotiation. And in 2017, between 2017 and the present, I've been working on a truly results-driven approach to negotiation, which is what my book is about. So, but one of the things that I've reflected as a result of preparing for this talk is that I think that the fact that I studied how to get results in organizations through performance management, where everybody already has a contract, everybody is supposedly in agreement that this is what we're going to do. All of those things are aligned. They're not two different parties trying to get together to agree on something. They've already agreed. They've agreed on lots of things. Even then, it is extremely difficult to get results, which made me question early on how easy it is just to agree and then get the results that you want. And that's one of the things that switched me in the direction that I now am headed.
Thank you for a brief recap of negotiation history in terms of
my part of it.
Yes, your part of it. I was wondering, Sherman, there's barely anyone out there who has more experience in teaching designing negotiation courses, and when we look at the variety of the variety of approaches, pedagogical approaches, which is available out there, right? There are so many different schools of thought, so many different approaches to how and what is in terms of negotiation pedagogy, what is important to teach. I was wondering. I have to ask a difficult question. I was wondering why it is the case. Is it because we have not understood what it means to negotiate well enough, or is it because negotiating well is so elusive that it requires simple, multifaceted approach to negotiation pedagogy? So, what do you think? Which one, or maybe is it both at the same time? Is it art? Is it science? What is your take on it?
My take on it is that we should be an applied science and a technology of negotiation. I think we should go toward a situation where we're as procedural as we can be, honestly, and we should say what we really know and try to learn more through research and go for that side of it. I don't think we're an art at all. I think we're a craft, or we're a kind of a learned area of skills. But I think that the variety comes from two things. One, I do believe we have a dominant paradigm, which is not that different if you look at the different schools in the United States, at least, and in Great Britain, to some extent in Europe, yes, but there are more changes around the edges than they are necessarily deep changes. I mean, there's some people that are definitely adversarial, agreement focused, but they're adversarial in their approach. A lot of university programs are more on the order of, yes, well, Harvard is kind of right around the center of it, but our view of this is somewhat different. People are struggling within what I consider to be a dominant paradigm to distinguish themselves. And therefore, you find, some people at Wharton that emphasize style. We're all about style. How do you, deal with your own, develop your own personal style? And I think that is not really the applied science technology approach at all. I don't think that football coaches teach their players. No, if you feel better about kicking the ball with your heel, you know, to try to score a goal, sure, do it that way. You know, develop that. No, I think that there are certain practices that work better, and our business is to identify those. And I think the variability is everybody wants to be distinct. Everybody wants to have people in their programs, and every author wants to sell their book, and and there's another thing, Remy. There's a saying that my mother used to love, which is, every mother beetle thinks its baby is a gazelle. So there's a certain a certain ego-driven um,
Yeah.
element in this too, and I would confess that it's impossible to get rid of that. So it certainly
Sherman, you've
characterizes
mentioned,
me.
yes, yes. So
Yeah,
I think we're both closer to this science, scientifically derived connections between cause and effect, right? So meaning, to be an effective negotiator, we have to learn how to generate the effects that make us effective negotiators, and the ability to extract these factors is
right.
tightly connected with our ability to understand what negotiation efficiency is all about, which means that comes from science, right?
Mm.
And I was wondering, Sherman, you've mentioned several times the dominant Western approach.
Yes.
could you maybe specify a little bit closer what you mean by that?
Right. Well, I like I say, I think we have a dominant paradigm right now, and it kind of started in the early '80s with Rafa's book, The Art and Science of Negotiation and Getting to Yes, by Fisher and Urey and Patton in the second edition. And so there's this position that's kind of coalesced around university teaching, executive education teaching, MBA teaching, schools of public service as well. And basically, what these are Western, because we have a much deeper tradition of agreement focus in the West, because we have relatively reliable legal systems, and we have what's called a linear active culture, which means that we like to think things, as kind of an outline form, right? And so we like that kind of process model. And so the process model that exists in this dominant approach is Harvard PON. It's the Oxford Program on Negotiation. It's a lot of schools in the U.S. It's a lot of schools in Europe that teach this idea that what we're really after is an agreement. That's our ultimate. We're looking for a good agreement. And that what good means can be sustainable. It can be legally sustainable. It can be other kinds of sustainable. It can be a lot of different things. But the main thing is our goal and indicator of success is to get to the agreement, to get to yes. And the thing is, what is done is you have preparations for talking, and you have talking in this approach. Those are the two big bits of it. And then if you come to an impasse or you come to an agreement, then there's a handoff to a completely separate process, which is the process of implementation. That is not negotiation. Negotiators exit the building as soon as the agreement is reached, and that's their job. And hip ho, and away we go. That is not a very integral way to look at the process. I would say that just advancing a basic idea that I have, a negotiation process begins when somebody has the idea that a negotiation with a particular party over a particular set of issues might be a good way to deal with a situation in which important results are in play, at stake, if you will. And so, once that happens, you have a whole process that ends when you have either achieved, well, always, let's put it this way, it ends when you have achieved as much with regard to those results that you've targeted as you can achieve. And
Mhm.
that's the true extension. You don't cut off implementation. But the dominant view, for a variety of reasons, um, has this what I consider to be somewhat truncated view of the negotiation process, and it's one of 6 different uh, approaches to negotiation, and it doesn't easily recognize the others, except
Mhm.
as maybe variants of itself.
Mhm.
But most of the rest of the world, the non-Western world, is focused on relationships. And relationships, uh, that is for important negotiations at least, and relationships are a different way of looking at negotiation. And we fiddle with the idea of relationships in the West, but we don't quite see it the way that non-Western people do. So, um, this dominant Western approach kind of does give us a particular view, and we just try to work at that, and we try to work at reaching the agreement, which carries us
Mhm.
part of the way down the road to
Yep.
results, but not far enough. It's
Yep.
necessary, but not sufficient.
Yep. Understood. Understood. So, Sherman, what's there? I've understood that there are a lot of aspects that we could question, criticize, or maybe suggest in terms of areas for improvements. But what were the factors that decided that this Western approach has become dominant? What are what are the benefits of this approach? Why do people like it? Why do people enjoy learning about it? And why it keeps being taught over and over and again, despite the shortcomings?
I'll I'll be I'll be honest with you. The first thing I thought of was that, well, it helped me make a living from 2003 to the present. So that's I give it 2 thumbs up for that. Um, but more serious to give you a more serious answer, it's the first real effort to do a research based approach to negotiation, and it is research friendly for that core that it addresses as part of the negotiation, part of what I consider to be an integral negotiation process. And so that's one thing. It covers some parts of this process very well. I mean, if you have the scenario that this approach imagines, if you have 2 parties that are really interested in agreeing, it says a lot about how to come to an agreement with them. It's kind of like, but from my point of view, it's also kind of like somebody who plans their American football strategy up to winning the 3rd quarter, and they, they don't plan it all for the 4th quarter. You know, they don't work out special plays for that 4th quarter. Uh, but they're very good in that, very helpful in reaching agreements, increasingly good at incorporating information gathering, decision making, and persuasion related research and techniques into negotiation. Max Bazerman, a very highly valued colleague of mine, has done a great job, massaging a lot of the research that Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, began to pioneer back in the late 70s, early 80s. And, that has become really a kind of one of the pillars of the discipline, how to deal with our natural way of negotiating, which is quite primitive and tends toward haggling. Um, Finally, well, it's so one of the things is it does draw upon many fields, and I think it's also done a great service in that it has brought our attention to the ethical necessity of negotiating more and becoming involved in conflict less often.
Mhm.
I think it has a very strong ethical bias in that sense. I think it may even overdo it to an extent, but I think it's a very valuable thing in general. that it's done. So I think I covered 6 points there. Six
So it
things
has
that I
its
think are
merits,
really.
yes.
Oh,
So
it has
basically,
great merits, and by the way, I have favorite books from this approach that I recommend to this very day. I always recommend 3D Negotiation by Lax and Sabanius.
yes.
I recommend Negotiation Genius, Bazerman and Malhotra.
Yes.
Some of Larry Suskind's books. Danny Earle's Point of the Deal, great book. So I think it has tremendous merits, and all of the criticisms that I have are friendly, and I hope they don't get me drummed out of the court.
Thank you, Sherman, for sharing this. Let's rant a little bit about the dominant Western approach, right? I mean, it's become
Oh,
dominant, once certain tendencies become mainstream, they are not questioned anymore. Yes, so it requires critical thinkers like yourself, yes, to somehow trigger our curiosity and maybe look beyond what's obvious, yes, what's obvious and what's being served, into what's not there. Yeah. So what is
mhm.
not there? What are the shortcomings of the Western dominant approach, Sherman, from your perspective?
Well, I almost want to say don't get me started, but we have to get me started because that's in the title of the podcast. They have the wrong ultimate goal and the wrong indicator of success. I think that's implicit in what I've already said. They focus on agreement, which is a means, not an end, and they ignore things that relate to the real end, which is always results. We always want a concrete result. We want a consequence of behavior. Behavior happens, a result happens, a concrete result, product, service, money increase. A lot of things can happen personally. A lot of things can happen at the organizational level. These are all results. And we want those results not for themselves. We want those results for their effects. We want them for their effects on us. So ultimately, the person who's, like I was saying earlier, a person who's negotiating a peace agreement doesn't want to have their agreement signed simply. They want people to stop being killed, property to stop being destroyed, and they want stability. So they want a set of results. If you want something for an organization, without a doubt, it's going to be a set of economically and perhaps reputationally indexed results. So I think that's the main thing. That's one of the main things that I would criticize. And so what I always say is we should switch our goal and our indicator of success to trying to get the best possible results in any given situation of negotiation. Then there are a couple of amputations here. As noted, the dominant Western approach amputates the part that has to do with actually generating results. And it amputates it to the extent that Danny Earle was quite correct when he said, "Look, we're acting as if the deal was the only thing that mattered. We have to think about implementation. Sotto voce, we have to think about results, right?" So he was very right about that, but he didn't go quite far enough in the sense that he only talked about, well, we should get implementers and people involved earlier. I think that the right focus on results causes you to look at preparations, causes you to look at discussions, and it causes you to look at results generating operations as the flow of the process, and to try to get to the very end of that because that's where the payoff is. So what we need to do is we need to figure out how that results producing part is going to take place. And we have to do everything we can, sometimes with intangibles, which is one of the things that you do very well at the study, intangibles like trust, to get to that point. But everything we do up to the point that we start getting actual results counts as working with means and making progress based on indicators of progress. They're not indicators of success. We succeed when we get the results.
Yes.
So the other thing that is kind of shocking to a lot of people in the non-Western world is that treating the negotiation process this way, two separate things, we negotiate and then we implement, kind of shocks people from the relationship approaches, in that they're expecting, we're going to negotiate and then we continue negotiating while we implement. When we cut off the implementation part and make it a second process, we reduce the tendency to continue negotiating as needed in a complex implementation or in a complex result generating process. And by doing that, we're doing ourselves a disservice. My experience and my studies of performance management indicate even if you've got an organization that's solidly, ultra contracted and ultra agreed on achieving certain objectives, you still have to have negotiation as a resource during all productive operations. I worked in a steel processing plant where the communication broke down between labor and management. And trust me, we had more to get people to work. We had negotiations to get people to stop sabotaging production lines. We had negotiations. We had negotiations and there was no strike or anything like that ongoing. So one of the things that we see is that amputation of the far end of the negotiation process from an integral point of view. Another thing is that there's a similar amputation at the beginning of the process. What does the dominant approach say about how a negotiation begins? It doesn't say when somebody has an idea that there could be a negotiation. No, it's you have to negotiate. You have to negotiate. That's the starting point. And we carry this out in our classrooms and our executive programs by saying, here's the case that you need to negotiate. We give it to them. And then we say, and now you need to figure out what your best alternative to doing that negotiation is. I compare this to kind of having a beauty contest where you declare that your girlfriend is the winner, and then you throw it open to finding other candidates. Once you've biased yourself, toward a negotiation, you're in it, and it's very hard to pull yourself out and go to your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, as the classical advice goes. We need to start thinking about what are the situations that concern us and deciding whether a negotiation or maybe one of many negotiations is what we should do, or should we do something other than negotiation, and prioritize from that point and let that flow into the negotiation process. Let that be the way that we go into the negotiation process. So that's a kind of the fourth thing. Another criticism is that negotiation tends to be a kind of a man with a hammer enterprise. Abraham Maslow said, if a man has a hammer, the world looks pretty much like a nail. And so there's a tendency to see negotiation as a panacea. This is how we're going to solve all of our problems. And so you have people like a very wonderful woman, Lee Thompson at Northwestern, who said, words to this effect, anytime that you require the aid of someone else to fulfill your goals, you are thrust headlong into negotiation. That is, negotiation is the only alternative. Well, there are dozens of other ways that are not negotiations to get what you want. Sometimes you get it just by asking. Sometimes you can get what you want from other people in other ways, beyond negotiation. Now, the strange thing is, within the panacea of negotiation, in this view, there's a panacea within the panacea, which is the step, I regard it as a step of value expansion. Very important, extremely important in the context of discussions, but it doesn't solve all our problems. For one thing, after we expand value by finding trade-offs that leave both or all parties, both, some, or all parties better off, we then have to still go back to value claiming, which some people still practice as haggling. So there's that, but there's also other things that happen ex post facto, like coming up with a non-implementable deal, which is one of the things that Danny Ertl warned us about. So I've seen books on negotiation where every single case, from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, was resolved through value expansion. And I just don't think, it doesn't, fit with my experience in the real world at all. Value expansion is definitely important, but it's not a panacea within a panacea.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Sherman, you've mentioned that you're working on a book which summarizes your thoughts on negotiation process and what it means, how to generate the results that we intend to generate. I think you called it result-driven negotiation method.
Yes.
Could
Yes.
you give us a rough outline in which direction or how you're planning to structure your work? What is the result-driven negotiation method?
Well, I'll tell you what I've done. I've looked at the negotiation process from this beginning to the end that I was talking about. We begin a negotiation when somebody has the idea that it might solve a problem. We go through prioritization. We go through all of the discussions and all of that, and we come to a point where we've gotten all the results out of this process that we can, which may be early on when we realize that this negotiation is going nowhere, so we're out. Could be the case that we're 3 years into the process and we're still, grinding out, cost-effective results, and everything is fine. But at some point, that will come to an end. So I'm trying to look at the entirety of the negotiation process, the preparations, the discussions, and there are more discussions than just two, more than value expansion and value claiming. And then there's certain things you do to generate the results. And so I'm looking at that whole process. And how I did this was after talking to a lot of people through surveys, pre-session surveys, and in direct conversations, and getting some of their input. I looked at a lot of real world cases, some from my students, some from multiple other sources, and tried to pick out the things that people did, what I call process components that people do to achieve progress toward results and eventually achieve results. And so I came up with the idea that a negotiation is basically bargaining, but you have to put other components around it to make it work in any but the simplest situations. Now, in a simple situation, you can bargain, and then you can exchange results. I can exchange, money for a used bicycle, and that's the end of it. But in a more complex negotiation, where we're talking about a merger, an acquisition, a technological development of some kind, we may need as many as 12 major steps. And I've identified these steps: preparations, discussions, and result-generating operations, or quote-unquote implementation, that make up this process. And then once I had that clear, I looked for more procedural things that we can do. That is, where we could say, okay, this is more like a science and less like a craft. This is more like a technology and less like, someone's quote unquote artistic work. And try to build those into each of those 12 steps. So you've got a system that can deal with any negotiation, from the most simple daily kind of negotiation to the most complex that can actually be operable. And you are guided through this system, and you're given kind of moment to moment advice, in the sense that you should be doing this first, this second, but if you get new information, you should go back to the previous process. So you have this flowchart like logic that tells you when to do what. And this is a big contrast to what you get in most negotiation books. If you open Getting to Yes, it has a quote method that tells you, you should do certain things, but it's general advice, and you have to figure out, when to apply this general advice, when to separate, for example, the people from the problem, how to do that. And it's not a sequential procedural system. So what I have is a more a true method, a method that does recognize that there are parts to this beast, and we have to address the parts in a certain order to make it work properly. And so then on top of that, as part of the book, I have a part that does deal with general advice, because there are items that are always there. For example, you always need to make rational decisions. You always need to be persuasive. You always need to have an eye out for your reputation and how you look to other people. So there's this part that is general guidance. And finally, there is a part of the book that deals with how to become an expert. A colleague of mine, Carl Anders Ericsson, and his colleagues have been working on expertise for years. How do you become an expert? How do you use practice? What do you practice? Well, my system is made to order for this kind of thing, because deliberate practice is predicated on the idea of breaking a complex task into its components and learning those bit by bit. Mine is already, it's deconstructed in that way already. So it's easy to apply the cultivation of expertise, a la Carl Anders Ericsson, to this kind of thing. So that's kind of the last major part of the book. So
wow, that sounds exciting. That sounds super exciting. And Francesco, I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more with Francesco, who cannot agree more with these points. One of the questions that we're getting also from the audience is, when are you planning to publish the book, Sherman?
Well, this is kind of like naming Vietnam in front of Nixon.
Sorry.
No. This is the thing. This has been, as you can kind of imagine, it has been a lot of work, and I didn't want to. I think it's fairly easy to write a book on negotiation. It's pretty hard to write a different book on negotiation. So I've taken quite a while. This version of the book, not the first version, but this version of the book dates from 2017. So I have every intention of getting the book finished and published this year. And I may have to, cross your fingers, I may have to immigrate to Mars if I don't do it, because everybody that has any affection for me is rooting for me to do this yesterday. So I think it will be out this year. And I would tell you the title is probably not going to be The Results-Driven Negotiation Method, because the publisher will say, no, I think we need to call it Eureka, or something else. So
Catchy
You
title is
never know.
yes. Catchy titles are
Catchy
important.
titles, yes.
Yes, exactly for
One
the
word is
publishers.
possible.
Exactly.
Right.
One word, and preferably questioning the legacy, the dominant approach. So Sharon will be cheering for you from the sidelines.
Thank you.
I hope everything goes well. My last question is always about great negotiators. So Sherman, for you, someone who has been in the field for so long, when you think about historical people, historical individuals, or contemporary individuals, be it diplomats, politicians, business people, you name it. Yes, who comes to your mind when you think about great negotiators?
I took the easy way out. I said, well, okay, great negotiators in the book that I happen to like, which is a book called Great Negotiations: Agreement That Changed the Modern World, by Frederick Stanton. He analyzes or describes, let's call it that, 8 different major negotiations from 1778 to 1986. That is, from Franklin and the French court to the Reykjavik summit with Gorbachev and Reagan. My choices were as follows. I chose Ben Franklin. I think Ben Franklin won the American Revolution uh, more than any other single individual. Uh, he went to the French court and he got the French to basically fund the war, to give us the bullets, the munitions of all kinds, the uniforms, everything that we had been missing to finish the American Revolution successfully. I know my British friends, consider it Independence Day because they say these days that they were glad they got rid of us. But Franklin was a master. Franklin was a master of subtlety and rational thinking. And I recommend this book to anybody who wants to get into this, Great Negotiations. For no other reason than to read about Franklin. Then I would say the Congress of Vienna and Talleyrand, who had the possibility of seeing France completely shunned, the way Germany was at the end of World War I. And he brought France back into the European community, and not as a pariah state, but as a state that was respected more than one would considering the body count at Waterloo and other battles. So, and Talleyrand was a brilliant man. He served not only the French kings, but he served Bonaparte. And so I would say that within the framework of the part of negotiation that we usually see, he was superb, and the results were superb. Same with Franklin. From the American point of view, not so much from the French point of view, from the British point of view, but from the American point of view, Franklin was a superb negotiator as well. And then the other choice was from the Israeli Egyptian armistice agreement in 1949, Ralph Bunche, who was dealing with Egyptian and Israeli negotiators that couldn't even look at each other in the beginning. And so he coaxed them through a variety of means and techniques, both I would say the carrot and the stick, to start talking to each other. He even had them play pool together. And so I would consider him, with regard to the techniques during the discussions and also the results from the standpoint of humanitarian perspective, at least, fewer people got killed. So that was kind of qualified him as a great negotiator in my view. There's certainly a lot of others, and the trouble with negotiation cases is they're often presented in a way that you get all the complexities and you can always find something wrong with them. And and sometimes it's the result, the most horrific. If you ask me for the worst negotiation in the list that is presented in this book, I would probably say the Paris Conference of 1919, which ended with the severe castigation of Germany, leading not so discreetly or subtly to the Second World War. So talk about bad results. And the truth is, a lot of the received wisdom from the dominant Western view was violated in horrible fashion in that negotiation. So those are three classics, and I think a lot of people can, relate to them.
Sherman, thank you so much for sharing your picks of the great negotiators. We're slowly need to come to an end. As much as we all enjoyed listening to your words of wisdom, I'm blending in a comment from Jonathan. I can only agree. It's been a great pleasure to me and our audience to listen to you, Sherman. Thank you so much for being with us. Good luck with your book. Good luck with your university, and I hope we will stay in touch. Thank you so much.
We absolutely will. Thank you so much, Remi. I do really appreciate it, and thank you to your audience.
Thank you.